So unfortunately no Lego trains today, but we're going to talk about Java's hidden gems and then specifically tools and libraries. So I won't cover them in depth. I basically will go through them really quickly. And yeah, as already mentioned, I work at ASML. If you want to have any questions, you can contact me later or simply ask them here. And all the examples are on my GitHub. So if you simply go to GitHub, let's see, where is it? And type in my name, so Johan Janssen, you can find the Java Hidden Gems examples here. So there are about 70 examples in here about all kinds of tools and libraries, and I will try and explain as many as possible during this session. And basically they are categorized in these 5 categories, but let's simply get started with the first one. So if you look at architecture, there's a really interesting framework a library called ArcUnit. So with ArcUnit you can basically define rules in your unit tests. It's like JUnit but then for unit tests. So we can define all kinds of rules. Let's simply show a few. So for example, I can say that all the classes that reside in the package controller and are annotated with the annotation @REST_controller should have a name ending on controller. Of course it goes wrong because I have one class which I call wrongly named, and that of course doesn't fit this rule. It should have been called wrongly named controller, then it was a good name. So this way, this is an easy example, so let's look at maybe some more interesting examples. So for instance, if I have packages, maybe one called payment, I want that only the classes that depend on it reside in these common packages, so my common package and some Java or Spring common stuff. I don't want them to depend on anything else. I don't want to have the payment classes depend on my user classes or something like that. So this way I can basically make sure that the structure that I define for my application is validated every time these tests are run. So for example, here I say that everything in a common package should only rely on anything that's common. So something in common shouldn't rely on packages in payment, because then you get circular references and you don't want that. You can even define it in layers, so I can define different layers like controller and service, and I can also say, okay, from which layer can I access which other layer. So if you have like a layered architecture or simply have some architecture in some packages, you can define these layers and make sure that they are only used in the right way. Oh, that one. This one. Second one is awaitility. So awaitility is a really small tool which helps you to test asynchronous code. So if you look at asynchronous code, if you want to test it, it's still running during your test. So in the past, or maybe still, a lot of projects use thread.sleep to basically make sure that the asynchronous code was executed, and after that we use the assert to assert that indeed everything is finished correctly. But that of course is a bit ugly. Sometimes on some machines it's quicker or slower and you can still have issues. So it would be nicer if we use something with awaitility, because with awaitility what we can basically say is I use this await keyword and I say, okay, I want to wait at most 2 seconds until some condition. So in my case I add stuff to a list, so I basically assert that something is present in that list, and after that I can do my normal asserts that I have with JUnit. And so if we run this example, let's make this one a little bit bigger. So we can see that the thread.sleep example took a bit more than 2 seconds, and the asynchronous one where we use the awaitility library took a little bit more than 1 second. Of course, it's a really simple, short example. If you have this in many places in your code base, this can really speed up your code and also make it quite a bit nicer. Then we go to the Jacoco agent. Who here is familiar with Jacoco? I think a lot of people. Most people know it from measuring the coverage of your unit tests, or maybe even your integration tests. But you can actually do other cool stuff with it. So what you can do is this. You can start an application and attach a Jacoco agent. So I need to command prompt here. Cocoa agent, and then execute this command. So I basically start an application. It's a really simple one, which retrieves car stuff, and now I need a browser to trigger it. So localhost 8080/car. This triggers basically my application, returns some almost random data about a car, nothing really fancy. The fancy stuff is coming later, so we stop this application. And then we create a report, because there is already a report created, but that's basically some kind of binary format which is not really readable. So with this command we can create a nice report and then look it up inside the target directory and simply open it in a browser. And now, now what we can see is, I shouldn't use this one, but the controller. Now what we can see is that the get method, the rest method, was being called, but the post method wasn't called. And that's, of course, I only did a get request. So what you can see here is that from a running application we can measure the coverage. So you could measure the coverage during a performance test, for instance. Or if you have feature tests, we had it in the past, we had a lot of feature tests covering every feature with Cucumber. And then we ran those tests and we attached the Cocoa agent, and then we got a coverage report out. And what we found out was that some parts of the code, quite large parts, weren't covered. So at first we thought, okay, we are missing some feature tests. But later we found out that it was actually that code, so we could remove the dead code. So with the Cocoa agent you can do all kinds of cool stuff around measuring coverage for basically anything. Even if you do like monkey testing, just clicking around like I did, you can use the Cocoa agent for that. Then we go to PyTest. PyTest is a form of mutation testing. So I have a quite simple example, some if-else statements, and depending on what values comes in, I return some one of the values. And if I want to test this, I can use PyTest. So I write a normal unit test. This is just the JUnit test, quite an easy one. And then I can run PyTest on it. Let's see where the command is. So this runs PyTest. So what PyTest basically does is it runs the normal test once. If that passes, it changes the production code. So it doesn't change the test, but really the production code. So the if-else branches that you saw before. So it replaces boundary operators like bigger than, it replaces it with smaller than. If you return an integer, it returns like 0 as an integer. So it makes different variations called mutants for your code base. So instead of running a test once, it runs a test like, I don't know, like 8 times for different versions of your code. And if that code still, the test still passes, then basically your test isn't good because the production code was changed and the test still succeeds. So it is a way to automatically test your how good your unit tests are. I mean, in the past, some managers said like you need to have 80% coverage, but that doesn't mean anything. I mean, you can easily test the 80% easiest part, or you can simply call all the methods without proper asserts, and you still have 80% coverage. With PyTest, you can actually get a good overview of how your test quality is. So let's have a quick look at the report. So here you can see which parts are properly covered. It's like your Cocoa overview. But it also shows, okay, in this line, the int was returned with a 0 and still the test passed, so your test isn't good enough. And it did some other changes. Basically, it made all these changes to my code base. This, of course, if you have a lot of unit tests, this will take quite a long time to run. So probably you don't want to do it each commit, but maybe during a nightly build or something like that. Then we go to test containers. So probably, yeah, all of you are familiar when you test something, for example, with a database. In the past, we would set up that database, run the test against it, but then you need to do a build somewhere on a build server, and you need the database there as well, and it's tricky because then you need to install it there or skip the test or things like that. It's not really convenient. with test containers, basically it uses Docker containers to do those kind of integration tests. So you can use it to sort of mock your database, but also for things like Kafka or other messaging services. You can simply set up a container and then run that during your unit test. So we use the add test containers annotation, and we annotate the container. In this case, we use a default MySQL container where we specify the Docker image name, but you can use any Docker image basically. And then in the test, I have a really simple test. I simply insert some data in the database and retrieve it. So I can here say, okay, my MySQL container, I want to have the URL, the username, and the password, so I can connect to it. And then I can basically do my statements and assert that indeed the data is in the database. So a really simple example, but this makes it really easy for you to do all kinds of integration testing. Now we are going to show a couple of tools at the same time. You can all use them independently. First we'll look at Gatling. Gatling is a performance test tool. Who here has used JMeter in the past? Some? Yeah, I used it as well and I still regret it. It's most of the time it's quite annoying to set up, and if you want to create a nice report out of it, it's also quite a lot of manual labor. With Gatling it's a lot easier to do things like this. So let's see how it looks like. So it's basically pure Java code. In the past Gatling was had a Scala DSL, but now it has a full Java DSL. So what we basically do here is we define the endpoint we want to test, and then we define a scenario. So in this case we do like a loop, the repeat 5, and we basically call 2 REST endpoints, we pause a bit in between, and that's it. Down below you see that we do ramp users 8 during 10 seconds. That basically means that the number of users is gradually increased. So after like 5 seconds we probably have about 4 users, and after 10 seconds we have 8 users. And all those 8 users will execute that scenario at the top. So it's basically 8 times 5 is 40 times the running those loops. So that's Gatling, and let's start the application here so we can run the test, the simulation. And at the same time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show JDK Mission Control. So JDK Mission Control is a profiling application. Originally it was part of the JDK. You had to pay Oracle money for it if you wanted to use it on production. Nowadays it's completely free, even on production. You can profile your application with like 1% overhead. It's really powerful. So let's see how this works. We start a flight recording. You can specify a lot of things like what you want to check and everything, but let's keep it simple. It runs for 1 minute. And now I quickly need to run my Gatling test before I'm too late. So now it runs the test. You see a little bit of information, for example, that apparently I need to upgrade my Gatling. And it shows progress. So here you see how far it is, 0%, 4 users active, 4 still waiting. Now there are 4 already done, because it's really quickly. And that's basically it. So really simple to set up, and we get a nice report, which I will show you. So, yeah, I think they're all more or less the same, so just pick the first one. So this is the report. Remember, if you did JMeter in the past, you get the plain data, and then in Excel or something you need to create an overview for your manager. This basically is already your overview. You can create PDFs out of it automatically as well. It has a lot of features, and yeah, it shows a lot of detail. So I can see the requests that are going. So all my requests went okay. I can see what the mean response time is, minimum response time, maximum response time, how many users were active. Basically all the details that I want, I can easily see that. And it's all generated automatically for me. I only created that small Java performance script that I showed you before. And then if we look at the results in JDK Mission Control, so again it's separate. You can do Gatling without this, or you can do mission control without Gatling, that's up to you. So with this you get insight in how your application is running. So for instance here it says, okay, maybe have a look at the heap. So we can click on it and it says it's used by a few classes. Yeah, of course it's a really simple example. But I can see a lot of stuff here. I can, for example, see how much time is spent in which method in my code base. So then I can try to optimize that method and see if I maybe have a performance issue in that method. I can see when garbage collects occur. So here we can see the garbage collects, which garbage collector was, how big the heap is. So with this you can get a good overview of your heap and then specify the min and max heap settings a lot better than just at random picking some values and increasing them when you have out of memory exceptions. So it's a really powerful tool. This one. So then we go to the next one, equals verifier. Who here wrote their own equals method in the past? You think it was correct? Tricky question, of course. So normally if you write like a really simple class, I have a student here with a first name and a last name, and what I did is I tried to create an equals method, a really plain one, but yeah, how can I verify that it's a proper equals method or not? That's where equals verifier comes in. So with equals verifier, what I can do, I can simply say, okay, equals verifier for class student.class.verify. Of course, the first try I gave was not correct. So after that, I tried to improve it, and then I created this equals method, which is apparently okay. And I needed to add some final keywords to my first name and last name to make sure the equals method works properly. And then I can test it again, and I can see that it doesn't throw any exceptions. So next time you write an equals method, consider using this library to quickly check if you indeed wrote a proper equals method. Then we go to GraphQL. GraphQL is basically a way to sort of query your REST endpoints. So normally, let's say you have a REST endpoint. Let's say you have a student endpoint, and a student can have a list of books that he or she read, and when you call the endpoint, it gives back a lot of data. Well, maybe in some parts you are only interested in the name of the student, but still you get back all that data from that REST endpoint. With GraphQL, you can basically query that data. It's a bit like SQL for a database, but then for REST endpoints. You can basically define what kind of data you want to get back. So if we look at this one, this is an example. So here what I want is I only want to retrieve my account ID, and then I assert that, okay, I only got the account back, so I don't get the user that also belongs to the account. And I can also do another request where I also get the user back and the account. So basically now I can query my REST endpoint with this. Of course, the code behind it is a bit more difficult than if you write a plain REST endpoint, but it allows for a lot more flexibility. So have a look at the example if you want to see the details on how this is implemented. Next we go to handlebars. Who got a message from a recruiter in the past month to work at a different company? A lot of you probably, right? Maybe you consider becoming a recruiter yourself and annoy your fellow developers. Then I can really recommend Handlebars. So Handlebars is a templating engine. So we can define templates. It's basically HTML. And then we can add some extra tags in it to basically later dynamically replace the data inside this template. So I will replace things like first name. I can even do lists. This is also automatically filled. So how does it work? It's plain Java code. So for example, a new person, my first name and last name. Of course, I mean, if you get a mail from a recruiter, often they don't fill in your first name and you get the first name or something in the mail. We get some expertise, GraalVM. Of course, everyone needs GraalVM experience, at least 20 years, of course. And PHP can also come in handy if you're a Java developer, stuff like that. And nowadays, having a normal function title also doesn't cut it anymore, so make sure you have like a really nice function title. And then we can run this. I chose to simply put out the generated text in my console. You can also choose to put it in an HTML file or whatever, but just put it in. So then you get something like this. Like I mentioned, first name, they often forget it. So some stuff is automatically generated, randomized and stuff like that. So I say, for instance, you need to work at least 55 hours a week, because I mean, we like our job, right? And really awesome salary and stuff like that. So if you ever do something with templating, consider this one. It's really easy, just a few lines of code, an HTML file, and some extra tags in it. Then we go to Java Poet. I think it was one of the better names for Java frameworks, Java Poet. I mean, you would try it only for the name. So with Java Poet we can do some cool stuff. We can dynamically create Java classes. So let's say I want to create this class. Again, quite simple, first name, last name, student object. And I want to create it dynamically instead of just using my IDE for it. I can do it like this. So here I specify, what was it? The set first name method, the get first name method, specify the constructor, and specify the class, and then I can create it and run it. Would you do this for your entire code base? Probably not, because it's completely unreadable. But let's say you create a library, and in that library you need to somehow dynamically generate Java objects, Java classes. There are a lot of libraries who actually use this tool to dynamically create these kinds of classes. So if you ever are in need to dynamically create classes, then I would really recommend to do this. Don't do it in your entire project next Monday, because else probably your colleagues will call me. Next one is Job Runner. So with Job Runner, basically what we can do is we can run all kinds of jobs. I mean, it already says it, right? So for instance, what we see here is I have some options to queue it, to schedule stuff based on some time, or even recurrently with like cron expressions, and then execute them properly. So this is really powerful. You can use it in clusters and cloud environments and everything to make sure your scheduling works nicely. So if you do something with scheduling and it's not already present in the framework that you have, or you need more advanced options, then have a look at this framework. It's really powerful. Then we have a look at JSoup. Always makes me hungry. So with JSoup, what you can do is you can basically retrieve stuff from HTML. So I create some Chocolatey packages to install Java on Windows machines, and there is some page which shows how much downloads I have, and with this test I can basically retrieve it. So based on some CSS tags and how my HTML looks, so it's a header 4, I retrieve the number of, or don't, where is it? Apparently it broke. Maybe they changed the HTML page. But if you want to do something with HTML and retrieve certain elements out of an HTML page, then JSoup can easily help you with that. Unfortunately, not with my example at this point in time. And then we have lib phone number. It's another thing which, next to recruiters, that are sometimes annoying. What I also find annoying is that websites ask for your phone number. And what's even more annoying is if they actually call you then. So I often fill in a fake phone number, and it's often accepted because they don't have proper validation, so that's good for me. If I would have created the website myself and I really wanted to have the password, I would have used lib phone number, because with lib phone number you can actually validate if a phone number is valid. So here I added some phone numbers. I can parse them with the phone number utility. I can check if it's a valid number, and I can even see from which location the number is. So this is like my hometown. So if it's a landline number, I can see the location. If it's a mobile number, I can see things like the carrier and the country. So this way I can, for each number, check if it's really a valid number, and if not, I can say, okay, user, you should use a proper phone number and not some random one, because you don't want to have spam. Then MicroStream. MicroStream is like storing stuff in an object-oriented manner. So probably you're all familiar with Hibernate and JPA, with the ORM frameworks, to somehow convert your object-oriented objects into some relational database. It often, in the beginning, works really easy until you encounter issues like performance and stuff. With MicroStream, they try to make it even more easier. So again, you can use all kinds of databases, SQL databases, but even NoSQL databases and all kinds of other storage solutions. I use the embedded storage manager, which is basically just storing stuff in a file. And if I use it, for example, with Spring Boot, you have these nice methods to create an easy repository and query them and add data to them. So what I simply do is I add some data to the repository, in this case simply some cars, and then I can retrieve them again. Oh, sorry, it was still empty because now it's 0. Then I add them to the repository, and then I can retrieve them and see that there are 3 inside. So this is like really storing in an object-oriented manner directly in a database without worrying about ORM translations and stuff like that. So that can be really powerful if you want to store your data. Then we go to OptaPlanner. Let's first kill this application. So OptaPlanner, it's nowadays it has a new name. It's called the TimeFold, but I need to change my example to use TimeFold. It's a fork by the original creator who left the original OptaPlanner project and started a new project based on it, but it still works more or less the same. So with OptaPlanner, what you can basically do is you can do planning optimizations. So that could be like conference scheduling. We have a lot of rooms here, a lot of speakers, and I, for example, give 2 sessions this week, but I don't want to give 2 sessions at the same time because, yeah, I'm still by myself and AI doesn't give my talk yet. And there are more constraints that we maybe have for a conference. You could also use this tool to optimize deliveries to various addresses. So basically, it optimizes anything that you have. So here what I do is, okay, each room can only accommodate 1 session at a time, because it would be really annoying if the other speaker would be standing next to me telling something else to you. Like I said, the speaker can only teach 1 session at a time. A speaker prefers to teach in the same room, because he's familiar with the room. He doesn't have to find it anymore. And if a speaker has multiple sessions, we make sure that he or she has to do all those sessions back to back. And then he or she is finished, to make it extra challenging, basically. And language stability, let's say maybe you have some sessions in Lithuanian language, some in English language, and you want to do both in separate rooms. We can do that as well. So let's start the application to show how that looks like. So here I have the time slots, I have 4 rooms, and I have a bunch of sessions that need to be scheduled. Now I can basically say solve, and then it's using the rules that I just showed you. So we defined some rules, and those are used to basically solve the puzzle automatically. And it's really quick, so it already did everything. So what we can see here is that in the 4th room here, we have all the Dutch sessions, Dutch. What other requests that we had? Oh yeah, we had the request that if a speaker has multiple sessions, that they would be scheduled back to back. So Sander Mak, he has multiple sessions, 1 here, 1 here, 1 here, and 1 here. But for some reason, it's not back to back, because he should have had 1 here as well. Anyone know why that is? Probably didn't see it that quickly, because even for me it was puzzling in the beginning. I basically defined a rule which says that back-to-back means that each session should be within 30 minutes of each other. But here there is some break in between of like an hour, so my rule was actually not good enough. So it's my fault, I didn't define the rule properly. So you still need to make rules properly. The other thing we see here is that there are actually 2 talks scheduled at the same time, which we said shouldn't be allowed. The reason for that is really easy. I basically tricked the system. I added more sessions than there was actually room for sessions. So again, this is my mistake. So you can see how it works easily if you do something wrong. Then we go to another tool, Apache Spark. So Apache Spark is mostly used for big data processing. Like if you have really huge applications, difficult algorithms that take quite some computing challenges, you can use Apache Spark to schedule it across multiple machines. I made a bit of a different example because I only have one laptop with me. So what I did is I read in, let's first start it because it takes a little bit of time. So I use Spark to read 29 gigabytes of Amazon reviews. I mean, I needed some big data stuff. And basically I parse it and then check if which of those reviews contain the text Java programming language. So I go to those 29 gigabytes. It's, what was it? How many records? 41 million records. They're all parsed. You could do this with plain Java. I tried it. And then first you need to Google how again you need to open a file with plain Java and read it. And then once you have your code finally done, it's running for a really long time. And then it gets out of memory because you don't have 29 gigabytes available in your machine. With Apache Spark, as you can see, it's just a few lines of code. I have to define some rules. So each line is converted into a review. And then each line is automatically checked for the review text. And in the end, it checks if indeed I get 28 results back. And let's see if we see it already. I think it takes a bit longer and I don't get my window back now. Where is it? It's here. So you see it's going through those records and it will take a little bit of time. So in the meantime I will go to the next topic and show you how long it takes in a second. Next topic is about toggles. Maybe you had those cool sessions from people at Netflix and other big companies talking about feature flags in their code, and it all sounds really cool, and then you start using it in your project and you find out, yeah, you need some work to set up, how do you enable and disable them, and how do you deal with those things. And actually toggles is a library that is really easy but can help a lot with it. So with toggles we define some features. So we have an awesome feature and an almost ready feature. And we see that the awesome feature is enabled by default and the almost ready feature isn't enabled. Then we can use these things in our code. So our awesome feature, this is a REST endpoint, and we check in the feature manager if awesome is active, and if active return some text. If not active, we don't return the text. So in the meantime, we see it took a bit more than 2 minutes, 2 minutes and 1 second with Apache Spark to go through the entire data set. So if you need to do big data processing or go to big files, do things with that, I can really recommend having a look at Apache Spark. Let's have a look at the toggles application. So localhost and then console is the default endpoint. So this I get for free basically. I added the dependency and I get this simple website for free, which shows all the features that I defined. This one we put on enabled status by default, so it's enabled. So let's look how that goes. If we go to awesome, that one was enabled. We get the text back. If we go to almost ready, it doesn't show any text. Of course not, because the feature is disabled. So now I can enable it dynamically, and I can refresh the page, and I have my feature. So if you want to do something with feature flags, I can really recommend having a look at this one. Next one is OWASP dependency check. So with the OWASP dependency check, we can check if our dependencies contain any known vulnerabilities. Of course, I put in some dependency with a vulnerability. Maybe some of you have heard of the Log4j security issue. Seemed to be important back then. Nowadays, I think no one cares anymore. So let's have a look how that goes. So if we go to the example directory and do, what was it, Maven verify. Oh, not there. Oh, did I now make a mistake in my form of... I accidentally typed something in my POM file, and then of course it doesn't understand the POM file anymore. So now it's basically what it does. It retrieves a list of known vulnerabilities from the internet. There is some organization that delivers those lists. It retrieves it locally, and then it checks for all those known vulnerabilities if you use a dependency with those known vulnerabilities. I cache them locally in my example to have all the records locally available and don't depend on the internet, but normally it would update like once every I don't know, week or something. It would update those reports and then check your code against the latest vulnerabilities. So here at C shows you that log4j has an issue. It also creates some HTML page, but I mean you can already see here what it is. Then another security tool is POSI. So with POSI, what you can do is basically define rules for your passwords. So instead of creating a regular expression and then validating if the user created a correct password, which adheres to all the rules, we can use POSI to define those rules in a human readable way. At least for me, regular expressions aren't readable. So we define things like the length, how many uppercase, how many digits, etc. And then we can use those rules to validate. So here, of course, this is a really bad password. We check if it's valid. Of course, that's false. And then we can get the messages back. Why is it false? There are actually 3 reasons given. These are the 3 reasons. Then I give a more difficult password. Check again, still false, because I'm not allowed to use numbers in a sequence. And in the end, I can use even more difficult passwords like these ones, and they are valid. So if you want to do something with this, have a look at it. Next one is renovate. So you can use things like OWASP dependency check to check if you have security vulnerabilities in your dependencies. But of course, it's even better if you update your dependencies regularly. But that's annoying because you need to check for new versions manually. Or you use tools like Renovate or Dependabot or things like that. They create automatically pull requests for you with the latest version. So let's see. Apparently I use Bootstrap somewhere. So it automatically creates a pull request where it updates the version of this dependency. So really easy to work with. Then there is another one which is important. If you update your dependencies, some dependencies get new artifact names. For example, if you use JuxB, in the past it was a Java EE artifact. Nowadays it's Jakarta. But how do you check for it? Because if you update to the latest version, you are still on the old artifact basically. And there again, there is a plugin for that, the old group ID alerter. So let's go to that one, old group ID alerter. I think it's also verify. So here it says, okay, you have 2 dependencies. First this one, this is the old artifact name. You should use the new artifact name, this one. And the same, like I mentioned, JuxB in the past had the Java X namespace. Nowadays you should use the Jakarta alternative. So this really makes it easy to do checks if you're up to date with your dependencies. Next one is Open Rewrite. So Open Rewrite, if you're still on like an old version of Java, you can use Open Rewrite to automatically update your project to a new version. Or what you can do is you can go from JUnit 4 to JUnit 5 automatically. So if I run this, it automatically updates it, and it also uses the new language constructs or the feature constructs of those languages or frameworks that you're using. I think it can even migrate code from like Spring Boot to Quarkus and things like that. It's really advanced and it's getting better and better. So if I now do like a git diff, I can see it replaced my JUnit with Jupyter JUnit 5, and I can also see it improved my tests. So here I had a test which possibly here I could get like a null pointer exception because I put the object first instead of the string. It automatically improved my test basically. So it changed the imports, everything. Really easy. So if you need to do upgrades to something, then give it a try. And then for the last example, who's here using Maven? Who's using the Maven daemon already? Not a lot of hands. Really, I can show you why you should use it. Let's see, we do plain Maven compile. It compiles all the tests that I have, or all the code that I have inside this project. Takes a bit of time. Of course, sometimes it's good that things take a bit of time because you can drink a cup of coffee, but it's also so often annoying if you want to know if something is right or wrong. So here you can see it took 12 seconds. If we now do Maven daemon compile, and Maven daemon, it's a free tool. Just install it locally and then use the Maven D command instead of the Maven command. And it works a bit like the daemon that you see in Gradle. Okay, where did it now show how long it took? So now it took less than 7 seconds, and I think if I do it again, it would be even faster. So that's like half the time compared to normal Maven, and that's for a really simple case. So really, if you do something with Maven, consider using the Maven daemon. Works really nicely. Yeah, now it's even 4 seconds. So the Maven daemon, once it's started, it's quicker. First time you start it, it takes a bit of time. After that, it's even faster. So give it a shot. So with that, basically, I went through the examples that I wanted to show today. There are a lot more examples, but you can see them in the repository. So if you're interested, have a look at the repository. And before we start with, I think we have a little bit of time for questions. First, my question to you: who already knew all the tools and libraries? No one yet? Ah, one person. Nice. You can do the session next time for me. So for the rest, I hope you learned a cool new tool or library that you can now try out later and investigate it more. So thanks a lot.